All right. So, if the fourth dimension is time, then a fourth dimensional representation of the universe would be a timeline, an ordered series of 3D moments. You could then conceptualize there to be a fifth dimension, where the fifth dimension is moving between these timelines, between these series of ordered 3D moments. A fifth dimensional representation of the universe, therefore, would essentially be a fractal multiverse, where each moment in time spawns its own set of possibilities, which then spawn their own set, and so on. Where each strand, you could think of it, of this fractal is a timeline, is a fourth dimensional universe, essentially. Currently, our bodies are pretty inexorably bound to the three-dimensional world and to time. We don't really get a say in the speed or in the way at which we flow through time, save for the extreme cases that general relativity predicts with, going really fast and super intense gravity and stuff like that. But for all intents and purposes, we don't get a say in our traversal through the fourth dimension. However, what I am positing is that we get to control our traversal through the fifth dimension, through what we call free will. Maybe consciousness, or the soul, or whatever you want to think of it as, is the part of our organism that can move between timelines. It can transfer our awareness between different strands of the multiverse. The version of you that inhabits a particular strand is deterministic in nature. Its past and its future are set. But consciousness is the ability to swim through that infinitude, moving your awareness through the timelines, moving your cursor, essentially, through the timelines towards the one you want to be a part of, where the you of that universe always did that decision you just made. Making a truly conscious decision or setting forth an intention doesn't alter the timeline you're currently on, it just shifts your observer or your cursor into an adjacent timeline where that thing already happened, where you already made that decision, or you were always going to have made that decision, if that makes any sense. So intention is literally orienting your internal structure in the fifth dimension to point towards the outcome that you want to happen. You are pointing yourself, aligning your vector with a future reality that is different from your current one, and then moving in that direction. And so maybe, because different versions of you inhabit different timelines, a candidacy for consciousness is randomness, is a quantum or stochastic random component of some kind. What do I mean by this? Well, no matter what strand of the multiverse we're in, a particular rock, assuming that it doesn't get moved by something else, is always going to behave the same way. A single vacuum fluctuation or tunneling event or other quantum stochastic event, whatever, isn't going to change that rock. It's always going to be the same rock, no matter which strand you're in. But you are different. You behave slightly differently in each of them. Maybe the human brain, and therefore humans as physical objects, are non-deterministic, because in some way we capture the quantum stochastic events that, happen throughout our universe in a way to add noise, essentially, to our behavior. This might sound crazy, but quantum tunneling is something we know happens. When you get small enough down on the scale of computers, when we're making transistors on the nanoscale, electrons just start to magically appear on the other side of the gate when they're not supposed to. Like, things break down. There's a minimum size because those quantum events are happening all the time. So it's possible that something like this is happening in our brains, where our brains are capturing either on the synaptic cleft or via action potentials of neurons or in a dedicated organ this randomness and using it to modify our behavior. And so here's the thing. We don't understand really why our brains were able to evolve so large so fast. It is an evolutionary anomaly. And so here's my theory. Evolution is built on selecting for adaptive random mutations over a long period of time. And so if you want to increase evolution, increase the ability of your organism to adapt, what do? You either increase the amount of mutations or you increase the amount of trials or amount of time. maybe our brains figured out a way to expand the amount of trials outside of our current timeline. You set up a computational engine that is driven in certain key places by quantum randomness. It has that nanoscale biological particle detector that it uses and hooks up to key decision-making parts of your brain, so that depending on, the blips and boops of the quantum particles coming in and out of the foam, or tunneling, or whatever phenomenon it takes advantage of, it modifies your behavior in different strands of the multiverse. And so with each of these states of fluctuation representing their own strand, you are essentially getting to deploy, 500 trillion or whatever it is, amounts of the same organism, in hopes that eventually, if you add enough noise, it'll make more adaptive decisions. The successful versions of this being, the versions that lived in strands where the randomness module actually outputs something helpful, are going to make decisions and have ideas that never would have been possible for that organism before. So instead of just number of humans times number of mutations times length of time, you instead get number of humans times number of mutations times length of time times however many possible permutations of that module there were, each in a different timeline. The vast majority of these iterations wouldn't lead to anything helpful, wouldn't lead to anything good. It would just be random noise. But in a few key strands, it's, basically the infinite monkey theorem. A monkey typing on a typewriter for infinity will eventually write the works of Shakespeare. What I'm saying is that Shakespeare himself was an infinite monkey, and that most strands of the multiverse, maybe he was a shit writer, and it was only in the one that we're in where he actually got the right random insight to have something useful come out of it, essentially. And maybe it's not something specific to humans. It's something, that happens with all species that have something like a neuron to fire. A neuron's action potential is essentially, up until it fires, a continuous function. And so if you constructed a neuron in a way such that an electron tunneling or a vacuum fluctuation or something like that could tip it over, that would be a way to infuse randomness into that organism. The exact method by which our brain does this isn't really that important to the idea. It's just the idea that somewhere in our brains is essentially qubit-like cells, if you think about it, in quantum computing, that allow random alterations to our behavior. So now that we've established these ideas, what do we do with it? How do we know how to point our vector? The answer that I think we need to address this is the idea of a higher self or a soul. In his book, Alien Information Theory, which I would highly recommend, Andrew Gallimore lays out a framework that I think could help kind of explain what a higher self or a soul could be. Our 3D reality, or as he calls it, the grid, is a lower dimensional orthogonal projection, essentially, of the, larger dimensional universe, or as he calls it, the hypergrid. And similarly, our minds are therefore a 3D slice of a much higher dimensional object that exists somewhere outside of our universe. Your soul is this higher dimensional topology that exists not in your brain but outside of it, that can connect to your brain via, brief threads of insight or creativity or genius or, inspiration, those type of things. Maybe our brain has an interface to kind of accept this information from outside of our current dimension built into it, and that's what our soul uses, quote unquote, to send us insight, send us creativity, ignite sparks of genius, that sort of thing. So if there is this higher dimensional version of you, I'll call it big U, capital U, then it stands to reason that there would be a most harmonious version of little u, your body, your mind, whatever, that meshes with that, or that expresses that higher dimensional version of itself the best. put mathematically, there is a strand of the fractal that minimizes the error function essentially in the down projection from your soul to your mind. And so with that, maybe there is like a metaphorical kind of golden strand of this fractal multiverse that I've been talking about. There is a way things were meant to be. There is a best you, and it's out there. It's something that you can point yourself towards, at least with the remaining options you have. This golden strand isn't something like ordained by a god or predefined in some animate way. It's just mathematically the best meshing between this higher self and you and your external world. And so a properly adapted multidimensional organism, if you want to think of it that way, such as ourselves, could in theory detect and move towards the best option, essentially using the multiverse as a gradient to descend. Your internal world and your external world essentially start to have intersections that to you feel like these tailored, intentional little coincidences between your mind and the outside world, but really it's a mathematical artifact, a sign, if you want to think of it like that, that you're moving in the right direction. The error function between you and your soul is shrinking, and you're seeing that physically. And so the natural next question is, what do I do about this? How do I descend this gradient, and how do I move myself towards that golden strand? And this is something I think I'll do a future video on, but I think the simplest way to put it is live in accordance with your soul. Do the things you are called to do. Listen to your intuition. Follow your creativity, because those are the ways that it connects with you, that it projects down into your mind and gives you those things that you couldn't have come up with yourself, that your brain as a static deterministic object could not have done. And again, I do plan to do a video on this topic in the future, but for now, I hope I have left you with something interesting to think about.